And let's straight away bring in our next guest. He's excellent. He's Andrew Fox, the Senior Associate Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society and former Major in the Parachute Regiment. Great to be catching up with you, Andrew. Right. Give me, first of all, your interpretation of why Sir Keir Starmer initially said, we will not enable American bombers to take off from bases such as Fairford in Gloucestershire to initiate this offensive against Iran, but is now saying actually they can, in a very limited scope, enable planes to take off from there in order to bomb Iranian missile bases. Why was that decision taken, do you think?
So I'll give you the Starmer version of this. It's not one I necessarily agree with, but this is the position of the government. There is a grey area over whether American involvement in the war against Iran is legal or not. And that is a campaign that I suspect will rumble on for some months, even after the bombs have stopped falling. Therefore, Mr. Starmer says they can't use our bases because then the UK would be complicit in an illegal act. Mr. Starmer's religion is international law, as we've seen over the Chagos and a variety of other things. This is ahead of national interest for him, is international law. Now we've had a strike on RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. We've also had a missile fall near British troops in Bahrain. And so the calculus has changed. We are now having a self-defensive conversation, and that changes the legal framing, which means that we now can let the Americans use our bases. That's the government's position.
Does that make those bases a viable target? You'll have far more information than I do about the kinetic capabilities of Iran in terms of what they've got in their missile stockpile and the range of those weapons, or indeed the capabilities of IRGC sleeper cells here in the United Kingdom. Could we see certain assets now targeted militarily in the UK?
Yeah, potentially. But look, we were already in scope of this. So RAF Akrotiri, the Americans fly planes out of there all the time, including their U-2 spy plane. So that was already a target. Bahrain is where the US naval base in the Gulf is located. Their air base is Al Udeid in Qatar. The Navy are based out of Bahrain. They were already a target. So there's nothing particularly new here. And Iran has been our enemy for a long time. We've had attempted stabbings of British citizens on the streets of London. We are regularly foiling Iranian-backed terror attacks on the UK's soil. So we were already in scope for this from the Iranians. This isn't anything particularly new.
The Iranian regime seems weakened right now, but they don't yet seem to be out of arms. If this were to escalate into or evolve into or continue as an almost air war of attrition, who's going to run out first? Will it be the Iron Dome? Will it be Tomahawks from America? Will it be Iran's own stockpiles if they are not re-upped by some of their allies such as China and Russia?
Yeah, and this is the killer question, and it's really a matter of time at this point as to who's going to run out of these missiles first. Now, I'm not sure that anyone would have been so foolish as to start this war without at least a rough idea that everyone had the missile defences they needed in place. The UAE in particular have shot down hundreds, and we've seen the very high-profile hits that have gone through that made front-page headlines because they were striking, famous hotels and that kind of thing. But there has been an incredibly high interception rate, 100% by the UAE last night. Very, very impressive results. The other factor to consider is as the Americans and Israelis continue striking these Iranian launchers, their ability to launch will be much, much reduced. And they're not going to have the ability to get off that salvo that will overwhelm any missile defences. So there is going to need to be a resupply. There is a ticking clock on this war, I suspect. We're going to run out of time and ammunition, potentially even before the regime falls. And that's a strategic question that Israel and the United States are going to have to grapple with.
But in terms of the fact that we're seeing the proxies of Iran greatly weakened, Hezbollah a shadow of what they used to be. Iran has already gone through, one assumes, a lot of its kinetic stockpile the last time around during the 12-day war against Israel. Is it possible that this is going to be the sort of storm before the calm, let's say, that Iran are throwing everything they've got in all sorts of different directions to try and save face, but ultimately it's everybody against one right now? It
is, and we saw last night the Gulf states invoked their Article 51 rights to self-defence. which has firmly aligned everyone in the Gulf against Iran. And we've even seen Saudi Arabia, who are famous for publicly playing both sides, have actually come out and said that they're condemning Iran and support the action that the Americans and the Israelis are taking. That's unprecedented. So Iran hasn't played the strategic game particularly well. However, on their rocket stocks, before this war started, they were already back to where they were before the 12-day war. So they'd been absolutely throwing everything they had at missile production. And you can guarantee that those missile sites would have been an absolute priority for the American and Israeli targeters when they were coming up with their list of things they need to strike. So look, war is never easy. It's never a frictionless free hit on your opponents. The Iranians were always going to score some hits. This was priced in to the calculus before they started the conflict. The question is, can the Israelis and Americans keep up this unbelievable tempo of strikes and keep the Iranians on the back foot and give them no opportunity to launch anything of any scale at the Gulf states, Israel, or indeed Cyprus?
One assumes that when it comes to the calculations on Iran's side, and indeed on our side, a lot comes down to the actions of China and Russia, whether Iran's allies are going to come to its aid militarily in terms of supplying some of those armaments. It seems to me thus far that neither wants to do that. First of all, it may be because they are unwilling or don't have the ability to provide that assistance. But also, if they were to do that, this hugely escalates what is currently a fast-spreading but somewhat contained regional conflict, largely more theatrics at the moment than a high death toll, into something that would begin to resemble a Third World War.
Look, I don't think Russia have the inclination right now. They're kind of busy in Ukraine. They are struggling to keep that war going at the moment. So Russia's involvement will be pretty much the arms they've given so far, and probably that's about it. And actually, to an extent, this war suits Russia up to the point that oil prices are bound to surge at some point today or later this week. And of course, that gives Russia more money to maintain their fight in Ukraine. So it's not necessarily a bad thing from Russia's perspective. The Chinese have a long-standing non-intervention policy. It would be astonishing if China got involved in any sort of meaningful, kinetic way. They've certainly provided the Iranians with arms and support in the run-up to the war. But once the bullets start flying, the Chinese, are absolutely, as a matter of faith, not going to get involved. And finally, I would say that both Russia and China are looking at what the Americans particularly are achieving in the Middle East right now, and they will probably be thinking twice. This is an astonishing show of force by the United States of America. We knew they were capable. It's not a surprise to anyone, but to see it in action is certainly going to have a powerful deterrent effect. The only concern for me is the fact that with two carrier groups in the Gulf, with all eyes on Iran, with a huge amount of their ammunition stockpiles getting burned through, including missile defences, whether China might see this as an opportunity for expansion in their own sphere of influence. But the Chinese are also going through some internal problems at the moment with various purges of the military going on and a bit of instability at the top. So now it doesn't feel like the right time for China to weigh in. So I think the chances of escalation to World War III are relatively low at this point.
And one last question, which is, one assumes that the objective now for America and Israel is going to be to continue trying to, by force, dismantle the Iranian regime. They've certainly already successfully taken a lot of early scalps, but it appears to be almost sort of Tehran whack-a-mole, that you can remove the Ayatollah, but guess what? His son's lying in wait, or his assistant's lying in wait. You can remove the head of the army, but there will be other military figureheads. The president of Iran is still extant. Do you think now that they are going to have to continue to try and target this leadership to try and get to the point where the regime realises it's out of manoeuvres and out of senior personnel, and so the last remaining few have to sort of jump off the sinking ship like rats?
No, I think there's 1.3 million men under arms in Iran, and it has a dispersed and very flexible command system. There's 11 different IRGC headquarters around the country. Each one of those has 5 or 6 subordinate headquarters. And that is a lot of built-in redundancy for when the command and control chain gets disrupted right at the top, as it has been, with we're not only on our third Ayatollah in 3 days, but every single member of the command chain of the senior echelons of government has been taken out. All 40 are now dead. And yet they're still able to coordinate a missile response across the entire region, which shows you how that redundancy is working in practice. Now, what the US and Israel are trying to do is create the conditions for a revolution that will lead to regime change. The stated goals are destroying the nuclear capabilities, the missile capabilities, and the commanders, and that's certainly happening. But with no ground troops, it's going to be impossible for Israel or America to effect regime change. So something needs to happen internally, and that will look like, I suspect, the continued degradation of security forces to the point where they either won't fight or can't fight. And that will then, in Tehran particularly, give any sort of future revolution in the next week or plus months the ability to actually succeed and seize control in Tehran. Once they've seized control in Tehran, they can start to ink blot out to the rest of the country. That's how I think it'll happen. It's very, very difficult, and there's no guarantee of success.
Andrew, thank you ever so much for your expert analysis, as always.